Maddox, and I am so glad you chose to spend some time with us today. And on this show, as you know, if you've listened before, we talk about EOS and the EOS journey that entrepreneurs and business leaders have been on. And I'm really excited to have my guest this week, Rachel Swedburg, who is the executive director of CASA for Barry, Ingham, Eaton counties. So Rachel, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much for having me.
Excited to have this conversation. So we've known each other a while. I've had the privilege and honor of coaching you and your team, but I want our listeners to learn from your journey. It's a unique and special journey. So before we get into that though, if our listeners are not familiar with CASA for Kids, give them a little bit of information about what CASA for Kids does and what your mission is and who you serve.
Absolutely. So CASA stands for Court Appointed Special Advocate, and it's actually a national organization similar in model to the Boys and Girls Club or child advocacy centers, which often people are familiar with. So I usually correlate to those. But it was actually started in the 70s by a family court judge who was seeing cases in child welfare, child protective hearings with children who never came into the courtroom, didn't really know anything about them. And he felt really strongly that children needed a voice in the proceedings outside of the way the system normally functions. And so he dreamed up this idea of community volunteers who would advocate for children and their families by association to make sure that their needs were met. And so that started in the 70s, and now it is in every single state here in the US except for North Dakota, I believe. And so CASA for Kids is its own standalone nonprofit serving the three counties you mentioned earlier, Barry, Eaton, and Ingham County. And really our one core primary role is to advocate for kids. And we do that in a myriad of different ways. And it can be kids who are removed in foster care in a foster placement. They can be in kinship care. They could be in a residential home. And we're seeing an increased trend of children actually remaining in home with their parents because of new laws that were passed in 2018 that really focus on keeping the family unit together as long as it's safe to do so. And so we've got CASA volunteers all across all three counties every single day out in the community, meeting kids in their homes, with their schools, sometimes doctor's appointments, just whatever the need is for that child to get to know them better and be able to advocate for them in the court system.
It's just such a powerful mission. And for those who don't know or have not been a part of the child welfare system, when a child goes into the system, either because there's an issue with their biological parents, or neglect or abuse, or something happens and the courts become involved, the system can be very cold and it can be very mechanical and bureaucratic. And these volunteers, and I know from personal experience in my being a foster parent, these volunteers, they're, as Rachel, as you said, their one mission is to advocate and care for that child. They're the voice for that child, the advocate for that child, and they are volunteers. And they play an incredibly important role. So thank you for the work that you do. It's so impactful for so many lives. So in running this organization, so at some point you decided that running EOS in your organization was going to have an impact. I'm curious what led to that decision, because as listeners know, EOS is thought of as a for-profit business operating system. And that's the bulk of the companies and organizations that run on it are for-profit, entrepreneurial, growth-oriented. But I think what people may not know is it can be very impactful for nonprofits. So tell us about that. Like how did your thinking evolve, or did it evolve, and what led you to EOS?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'll say day one, before I even started at CASA, I wanted EOS. Did I know what EOS was at that time? No. So that's maybe a little bit of a cheating answer. But I actually started my journey at CASA after working in the field of human trafficking, domestic violence, and sexual violence for almost a decade, both in New York and in Michigan. And I had decided I wanted to go get my master's. And I wanted to get my master's for one reason and one reason only, because I had worked in so many different nonprofits who did not have the business structure and supports to realize their mission. And I think it's one of the most overlooked things in nonprofits, and not intentionally. I think it's unfortunately a little bit of the nature of the beast because we focus so much on the program and the work being done, and all the funneling of money and energy goes into that space. But that's not sustainable, right? And so
Yeah.
I had worked under fantastic leadership, challenging leadership, and even with the best leadership, when you don't have sustainable practices, sustainable HR, sustainable back end pieces that are supporting your staff as well as they can support the community, we burn people out. And we talk about burnout in this industry all the time. We talk about the challenges. And I think, in my experience, and I've seen this come to fruition at CASA, which we'll talk about in a little bit, when you build that up, you build in the sustainability, you prevent burnout, and you create natural structure that we so often have always been like, well, that's a business thing, but nonprofits are businesses. Right? We
Yeah.
forget that. Nonprofits are businesses. They're a different type of business, but they are a business. And so my paper to get into grad school was about this concept entirely. And I went and got my MPA with an emphasis in nonprofit management, learning a lot about public service and all of those aspects. Right around that same time, started working at CASA. It was also mid-COVID, which was fantastic timing for me because I love to innovate. And so it was an opportunity to grow and figure out what opportunities we had. We had been a fully paper organization before COVID hit. And my first day was actually the same day as the pandemic stay-home orders from the governor. So we got to shift
Wow.
that really quickly. And so all that to say, from day one, I walked in knowing this was the space I wanted to build. And we were a very small organization when I did take the director role about a year after I started with the organization. Right as I got my master's, I had the opportunity to apply for the position and was awarded it, which was fantastic. But we were very small at that time. And so I did a lot of things that I wanted to do internally and really started focusing on quarter work and making sure we had review processes and quarterly check-ins and pieces like that. And so when I reached out to you and said, I might need some leadership mentorship, we'd grown tremendously. Let's see, we started with about 5 staff when I took the position and a budget of around 300 to 400,000 that was almost entirely grant funded. And now we're closing in on $1 million budget with over 10 staff, about 100 volunteers, and we are serving all of the judges in all of our counties about
And
5
that's
years
just
later.
since 2021.
Correct,
So,
yes.
yeah. So we talk about entrepreneurial, EOS is for the entrepreneurial growth oriented organization, and that certainly fits the bill. And also for organizations that have a vision for growth, and CASA for Kids certainly checks that box as well, because there are other regions that need service that don't have it. And I know in working with you and the team that that's part of our growth, our 10-year target is we want to expand this and serve more kids that need to be served that are out there. So that makes all the sense in the world. But you also hit on a couple of other things too, which is you need to be a nonprofit that understands that a nonprofit has to run like a business, right? And I remember talking to you and the team about that in the very first meeting we had, right? And you were like, "Oh yeah, no, I totally get that. I totally get that we need to have the right people in the right seats. We need to have the right processes. We need to be able to solve issues. We need to, be able to be metric oriented and have KPIs and all of it, works. So I think if you're a nonprofit, the sum of that is, if that sounds like you, then this operating system can and should have an impact on your business. I'm curious, what are some of the biggest impacts it's had for CASA for Kids? Like, where have you seen breakthroughs, or you've seen it make a difference, or where has it been hard? Any of the above?
Well, I think the things that we've seen breakthroughs on are also hard, right? So I'll answer yes and, which is,
Yeah.
we've seen turnover that we have not had as an organization in some time, but that was very clearly needed because of people not necessarily aligning with either their role or the CASA way. And so really, well, as that is hard, it's also an opportunity to celebrate new opportunities for those people, as well as CASA growing further and further into the structure that's really going to allow us to maximize our impact. And so I would say that's definitely one of the biggest pieces that we've seen. But beyond that, particularly in our program, which is our most important function, having the L10s and the weekly structure of those pieces has really streamlined our internal systems for the program to make sure that we are serving as many children as possible, to make sure that we're all on the same page, that we're getting consistent training for our volunteers, for our staff. And it's really allowed us to identify gaps where that isn't happening to make sure that we can continue to grow. And I do credit our final expansion. We actually, in May, I believe, signed on with all of the judges in Ingham County for the first time. When I started my journey with CASA, we had one judge out of 4, and it took a long time to build that trust and relationship. But really, I think the work we started doing prior to EOS, but really solidified with EOS starting in January of this year, resulted in them signing on a full MOU with us for all of the judges in all of the courts in Ingham County, which has been a long-term goal of ours. Actually was going to be our 1-year goal for this year, and then we secured it before we even got halfway through the year.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's man, you hit on so many important topics. And if you're an organization listening to Rachel and I, and you're considering EOS, one of the things that Rachel, you mentioned is important for me to underscore, that when you implement an operating system like EOS and you get really serious about the right people being in the right seats, there's a couple of important things to know. One is you will have some turnover because you likely have people that are in the wrong seats, or maybe are not aligned on the same core values that your organization has. You talked about the CASA way. That's your core values. And it's healthy, not only for the organization, but for the individual to call that out and to allow for those changes to take place, to let them go somewhere where they're better aligned and they're going to have more of an impact. And it's better for the organization too, but it isn't easy. It is painful when you go through some it's short-term pain versus long-term pain is the way I describe it. Then you also talked about how getting operationally mature in the program part of what you do allowed for the kind of impact you're starting to have now with all the judges in Ingham County. Organizations need to have that operational maturity if they want their mission to succeed. There's a lot of things that come to mind. No margin, no mission, right? If we can't operationally be excellent, our mission suffers. And I think that's a key differentiator in the nonprofit world, is that leaders like you see that. You saw that early on and you said, we're going to be excellent in how we operate. And we need a system to do that. And that's what EOS is a system that helps you be excellent. You do the work. So that's awesome to hear. Was there anything that surprised you on the journey? Anything that you thought, man, this was a little bit of a surprise, or it wasn't what you expected?
I think that right person, right seat. And I want to call this out specifically for the nonprofit organizations, because some of the language that is used in this system doesn't feel very nonprofit-y, right? Like saying the right person, right seat. Some of this doesn't feel, as accessible and intentional as nonprofits attempt to be. But what I've really learned and what my team has learned is what that means in our world and in our language, because I think sometimes we get so in the weeds with our nonprofit-y language that we miss the heart of what it's really doing. And so for us, EOS clarified a lot of that. I always talk a lot about scarcity mindset and how we can't operate from a scarcity mindset when we're hiring, when we're retaining people, volunteers. Nonprofits so often live in a scarcity mindset, which means we'll take any dollar that will come, any person that will come. And that's that warm butts and seat concept, right? That we talk about so much with EOS. And
Right.
so I think that learning that was a little bit of a challenge at first, but really being able to identify and correlate those and really see how EOS actually captures and names things in shared language that we had been struggling to name. A great example of this that was a surprise to me was the accountability chart. I talk all the time, and I know every nonprofit leader I talk to talks about all the hats they wear and all the things they do, and our boards don't understand how much we do, and yada yada. And the accountability chart does that. It
Yeah.
lays out in a really clean, clear way how many different divisions I sit on and how many different seats I hold and all the different responsibilities. And it creates natural accountability that just genuinely is something I have conceptually talked about my entire career and have never seen anyone put it down on paper in such an effective way. And so I think that was probably the biggest surprise for me, in a good surprise, of just to be like, this visualizes what I am constantly talking about, and I've never seen anyone visualize it that way.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And it doesn't have to be overly complicated. The accountability chart is, a very simple tool that basically says what are the seats within the organization. And for each of the seats that we need, first of all, do we have the right seats defined? So let's look at the structure. And in the work that I've done with, dozens of organizations, it's always surprising that often, I'd say most often, the structure that exists pre-EOS implementation is not really the structure they need. It kind of grew organically, or maybe they put it together like they're putting together a puzzle. I've got all these people, so let me fit them into a structure, which is the opposite of how you should do it. And what you're talking about is doing it the way you did it, which is the right way. What structure do we need? What are the seats that we need to really achieve our long-term goals and our medium-term goals and our one-year plan? And then what are the roles? So it's clearly defined who's accountable for what. That's why they call it an accountability chart. And then let's jointly hold ourselves accountable to that. And you're talking about another issue, which I was going to ask you about, which is how has this gone over with your board and with your volunteers, and how has the communication of EOS gone with those two entities? Touch a little bit more on that. I think what you're saying is for the board, it provided some the accountability chart provided some clarity.
Yeah, I would say that the accountability chart provided some clarity, and then the reporting metrics are incredibly helpful and have really streamlined a lot of the reporting that I've been asking my team to do quarterly in a more organic, do what you will type of way. So it's really just provided a lot more structure and clarity for the board, and their buy-in has been very easy in that aspect. For our volunteers, honestly, talking with my team about this pretty recently, we have not done a good job of rolling this out to them yet. We need to do that. I think as we really focus on and talk about what that organizational structure should look like, and we really get intentional with that, I think we're realizing more and more as a team that we really need to do a better job of including the volunteers in our organizational structure. They're oftentimes just a program afterthought, right? Of when we're talking
Yeah.
big leadership, the program's very focused on our volunteers, but we're missing that opportunity to really onboard and treat our volunteers as a part of the entire CASA whole and make sure that they are aligned with the CASA values and CASA way, and that they really understand our mission and what we're doing. And so that's actually something that the team is going to be working on in the next couple of quarters. It's on our long-term issues, and it's something we want to really figure out how to best involve our volunteers in that process.
That's such an interesting point to me, because often in working with teams, there are either volunteers, if it's a nonprofit organization, or in the for-profit world, there are contractors that do work all over the organization, that do important work, that play an important role, occupy an important seat. Um, and that next evolution is to understand that they're part of that structure, and their roles have to be clearly defined, just like your senior leadership staff. Um, and there has to be accountability there, and communication and clarity, even if it's a 10-hour a week contracted marketing firm, or a 10-hour a week IT firm, or whatever it is, in the for-profit world. And you're using the same concept for your volunteer staff. And for you, that is the bulk of the work you do. That's the core focus of the mission. And so, yes, getting clarity in that group of people, that's the next evolution. That makes complete sense to me.
Yeah. Yeah. So that'll be our next journey. I think we're all really excited for that.
Yeah, me too. And now, if you were to go back, I guess just in wrapping up, if you were to go back to when we began this journey, um, before your very first session, is there anything that you would tell yourself, knowing what you know now, you would tell yourself back then?
Yes, absolutely. A couple things. I'll just kind of to tie into your original question too. I remember sitting at breakfast with you and just saying, we're at this place where we need some sort of structure. I need training, or my team needs training. I don't know what it is. And then you explained EOS, and I was like, this is it. This is what we need. This is the thing. And in my classic Rachel way, because I am both a strong I and V, I thought, aha, we've found the solution. We will implement it tomorrow, and everything will be solid within like a month or two, maybe end of quarter, right?
Yeah.
And I think if I was going to challenge myself, I would really remind myself to slow down, which is something that being that split role has really helped me. I can now name and use clarity breaks to say like, okay, I is going to take over and we're going to slow down. We're going to put the visionary on hold for a little bit. But definitely in that moment, I was like, we've got the solution. The whole team was feeling the same way. And it was like, we're going to be solved in a quarter. And um, I think that didn't impede our progress, but I actually think it slowed it down even more because some of the learning opportunities and things that we probably should have leaned into more as we started rolling out, we were all just so focused on get there, get there, get there, that I think we
Yeah.
missed some of those pieces. And so that's a big piece of my HR planning as I work with our operations person of just thinking about how are we going to make sure when we onboard new people that they're learning these new tools and they're coming in and really getting a feel for the EOS system as well, because I think we missed some of those opportunities because we were just so excited to have something that we knew was going to work and we just wanted it the next day.
Yeah, and you're driven people, and you're all very accomplished on your team. You've got a team of great leaders, and so that becomes it's almost like it is counterintuitive. This concept of less is more, slow down to achieve more is a hard one to learn. That's such a good call out. I always think of the story that I tell in session room. I probably have told it with you and your team about the man who wanted to become an expert black belt in karate, and he sought out the world leader karate sensei and asked him, hey, how long will it take for me to be a master black belt if I start training with you? And the sensei said about 10 years. And he said, well, I am independently wealthy. I don't have any, this is it. This is going to be everything I do. And I'm going to put everything I have into it. I'm going to read everything there is to read. I'm going to train 10 hours a day. I'm going to do, go above and beyond anything you've ever seen. If with that in mind, sensei, how long do you think it would take? And the sensei looked at him and said, in that case, it'll take about 20 years. So it's less is more. You have to slow down to achieve more. And it is counterintuitive. So thanks for calling that out. You also touched on the fact that you're in both the visionary and the integrator seat, which that I love how you described it. I think what you were saying is it took some time for you to recognize which part of you was doing what. Am I being the visionary or am I being the integrator? Because the visionary is let's go, 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 go. We can do all this. We can do it all today. The integrator is like, well, hold on, there's an impact. we have to do this right. So you've had to balance both of those, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, and that's something that with my teams that have that, where and it's probably about half where the visionary and the integrator are the same person. They've had to learn that, and then in some cases the organization evolves to having two different people in those seats. It becomes an issue when it's an issue. For you, you're managing through that right now, just knowing that, hey, I have to be clear when I'm the visionary. I think in one session, somebody on your leadership team even said, we sometimes will ask Rachel, am I talking to the visionary or am I talking to the integrator? Right? Because it's two different conversations.
Yes, absolutely. I think that just the shared language alone for the team has been really helpful. And it just helps us be more intentional about how we're approaching our solutions.
Outstanding. Well, so if folks are listening, I want to make sure that we get this information out. If they want to support CASA for Kids, and I highly recommend that you do. This is an organization I know well, and I can tell you your money goes to serving kids. It goes to serving the kids that need it, the kids whose lives have been turned upside down and need that person in their life to come alongside them and say, I'm here for you. My mission is you. I'm here to advocate for you, to care for you, to represent you. I can think of no better cause. How would they find information on how to support CASA for Kids?
The easiest way would be to go to our website, which is just CASA, CASA for FOR, kids, KIDS, Inc.org. and all of the information about your opportunities to get involved. I mean, some people, this may have tugged at your heartstrings. You maybe want to volunteer. We are also always looking for donors, but volunteers are really the heart of what we do. So, when you think about how you can contribute and support us, there's a myriad of ways, and you can learn about all of those on our website. We are coming into year end and Giving Tuesday, so there's lots of opportunity for people to support. And I'll just say this too, because we talked a lot about this, and I think it's a really important tie-in of your money won't be going to pay for EOS, right? We secured additional intentional funding to take care of these operations and HR pieces because we believe it's important. And we know that our funders want to support our program. And so we work really intentionally to balance that and secure additional funding to cover our administrative and operational costs. Those are not costs we're asking our donors to eat.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I'm glad you brought that up. And for nonprofits that are out there, know that there are ways to get funding for operating systems like EOS and training through your board and through grants and through other methods. And you've done a fantastic job of identifying those. So we want the mission to be supported by, or we want the donor dollars to go right to the mission, and that's where they go. So thank you for being on the show, Rachel. This has been outstanding. And what you mentioned, Giving Tuesday, you're going to be doing something special on Giving Tuesday. You want to mention that?
Yeah, so another big win we had this year was we actually, another dream came to fruition of moving into a nonprofit hub. So we're in a hub space with multiple other nonprofits now, all really working collectively together. And so we're actually doing a Giving Tuesday Uno tournament, think poker style live. It will be on all of our social medias. You can tune in to watch it. We are looking for sponsors and supporters for that. So people can always reach out to me if you have questions there. All that information's on our website as well. But it's going to be a really great way to leverage a day that many of us are doing asks in something that actually pours into our community and just builds general awareness about the nonprofits here in the heart of Lansing.
Super excited about that. Think if you're thinking about this, think in terms of like the ESPN poker tournaments that you've seen. It's going to be like that with Uno. There will be celebrity players. The nonprofits that are in the nonprofit hub, which is an amazing facility. If you live in the Lansing area and haven't gone to see it, you should. It's incredible. They're going to all be participating, and it's going to be just, I think, a really creative way to get the word out there about the amazing work being done by so many great people. So thanks for doing that. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you, Mike.
I want to thank all of you for listening. This has been Getting a Grip on the Michigan Business Network, and we will catch you next time. Have a great day, everybody.